This week's reading from Policy Paradox is about causes, and there are two key learnings that I'd like you to take away. The first one is that policymakers choose which links in the chain of causation, notice the metaphor there, to focus on, not just when defining solutions, but when defining problems. So they focus on links in the chain of causation when defining problems, as well as proposing solutions. That's one of Stone's key points in the chapter, I think. Another point I hope you'll take away is that history is contested. I'm going to show you a book. This book is called The Guns of August, and it's by Barbara Tuchman. As you can see, it's a pretty thick book. And between now and when we meet again next Wednesday, I'd like you to read it. Just kidding. I just want you to know it exists. The other thing I want you to know about it is that it was really influential. President Kennedy wanted every officer in the fleet to read this book in the run-up to the Cuban Missile Crisis and during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why? Why this book? Well, Barbara Tuchman, in The Guns of August, influential book, said that the great powers in Europe stumbled into World War I through a series of unfortunate events. Miscalculation, accidents, they lost control. Railway timetables had a great role in ensuring that Europe somehow stumbled into World War I and millions of people died. That's the basic shtick of The Guns of August. Maybe I'm not doing it justice, but that's the thumbnail sketch of The Guns of August. And President John F. Kennedy thought it was really important for everybody at sea, everybody in the military and the Navy, to know that this was a danger, that the Cold War could turn hot if they made some foolish miscalculation. They could make an accidental decision, or a decision that would become a much bigger impact decision than they thought that it might. So beware of consequences. So Kennedy thought Guns of August teaches us very important lessons about how government needs to control events. So that's a lesson from history that President Kennedy learned. Problem? It was wrong. Not that it's wrong for governments to retain control of situations, let them get out of hand and have millions of people die. That's a good thing. Exercise that kind of control so as to prevent the deaths of millions of people. Really good lesson. But check out this book, Europe's Last Summer. Who Started the Great War in 1914? By another historian, David Fromkin. By the way, Great War, to historians, especially those of us those people from Europe who kind of talk funny like me, when we say Great War, we don't mean that it was really cool. I mean it was big. The Great War meaning World War I, because it was a big war. So who started the Great War? And what Fromkin points out, and this is a relatively recent history book, and his contention is that Barbara Tuchman was wrong. Europe didn't stumble into war through a series of accidents and miscalculations. The Great War broke out because Germany and Austria wanted to invade Russia and first knock out Russia's ally, France. So World War I broke out intentionally. Germany and Austria wanted to attack Russia and France. Not an accident, intentional. And one of the points he makes is that Kennedy was right to want to retain control of the situation in the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's nothing wrong with that. But let me read you what he says about causation. It is true to say that France, Russia and Serbia were not fully in control of their situation. All of them wanted to remain at peace, which, however, was not an option available to them. But it was not because of the unintended consequences of mobilization or the exigencies of railroad timetables or the requirements of alliance systems that a war was forced upon them in the summer of 1914. It was because they were attacked. They were attacked by Germany and Austria. So let's think about that. Let's think about causation and the lessons of history. What I'd like you to do is read or reread that article on learning the lessons in quotation marks of history, about the lessons that the policymakers in the administration of former President Obama learned from the, in quotation marks, mistakes of the policymakers in the administration of former President Bill Clinton. And what I want you to do is make a list. List the lessons that the policymakers, in quotation marks, learned. And ask yourself, were they right? Were those lessons right or wrong? And then make a list of the information you need in order to determine whether they were right or wrong. So remember, policymakers make choices about which lessons of history to learn when defining problems as well as offering solutions, and history is contested. Final point I'd like to make. I remember being in a hearing in the State House once, and it was about education, and somebody raised the issue of a new history textbook for high schools. And one of the legislators said, I don't know why we keep having to buy new history textbooks for high schools. I mean, I get that they're battered and worn and used, you might need new copies of them, but why new editions? Because the history doesn't change, right? Well, it's true that the objective historical facts, what really happened and why, that doesn't change. That's objectively true. You can't change that. You can't go back, so far as I know, you can't go back in time and change what really happened. But interpretations change. Historians argue. History is contested. That's why we get new history books, new history textbooks. So bear that in mind.